Coming up next on Connecticut Culinary Connection, we have a very special guest chef, Phil Levere, who was with us here before on Connecticut Culinary Connection. And tonight he's going to make a special tuna steak dinner. So without any further ado, we're going to get started right after this with Chef Phil Levere. Paul Revere.
Phil Levere, thank you so much for coming on and allowing me to interview you. I'm really excited about this one. As some of you know, this is actually my father, a huge mentor of mine. He is coming on to talk about his experience as being 35 years in the culinary industry as a chef. He has unlimited amount of stories that he's told me my whole life, and something I'm really excited to share with you guys. Again, thank you for coming on.
Glad to be here, Matt. Thanks for inviting me on as your guest.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get right into it. What made you want to become a chef, and why?
Gosh, you know, it was an interesting way into the industry for me. First of all, I grew up in a family with an Italian mother, and I had 5 siblings. And our house was like the house where everybody gathered for the holidays. My mom prepared all the holiday meals. Her 2 sisters lived right nearby, and they contributed every holiday meal planning. They would bring their own specialties and things that they were really good at making, and there was always tons of people at our dining room table. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Mother's Day, Father's Day, there really wasn't, we didn't need a holiday excuse to get together. And there were tons of birthday parties all throughout the year, and all of those things brought us all together for big meals. And my mom just absolutely loved being in the kitchen, making any number of dishes, Sunday roasts, lasagnas, pizzas, pastas. She made her own bread. She did absolutely everything. And her sisters kicked in with a lot of desserts and just surprises. You know, they surprise us all the time. At a young age, I always asked my mom if I could come out and help her in the kitchen. And probably that's where the joy of being in the kitchen and cooking came from, was being able to spend that time with my mom. And particularly I remember making holiday cookies. So those were great memories for me. And I always liked the process of, gathering the ingredients together, putting them together, and then having that finished product come out. And of course, something that was so good to eat afterwards was just a special bonus on top of that. But it was just something really special for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, I never really thought about, even at, in my teenage years, that I wanted to be a chef. I had other aspirations. So when I graduated from high school, I went to college. I went for a year, and this college happened to be right down the street from our house. Not down the street, maybe 5 or 6 miles away. So I would drive there and park in the parking garage, get out of my car, walk to class, finish the class, go back to my car, and drive home. Really wasn't much of a college experience. It really felt like I was still in high school. As I was coming towards the end of my first year of college, I thought, this really isn't doing anything for me. It's no different from high school, but I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody. The classes were 300 or 400 people in some of these classes.
Wow.
In big auditoriums, and it was just not really an experience that I was having any fun with at all. I went back to the high school to see my guidance counselor and talked about that, and he, through that conversation, planted the seed for me to apply to the Culinary Institute of America. And I thought, yeah, I like cooking. Why don't we give that a try? So I did. They accepted me, but because I had no experience in the industry, they said, we will accept you, but we're going to hold a spot for a year, and in that year, you need to go out in the field and work and see if this is something that you want to do. See if it's something that you can do. It's not easy work. And having had no experience, there's no point in you going through culinary school if it's something that turns out you don't like doing.
Wow. You really don't hear culinary schools doing that these days.
I don't believe they are doing that these days, no.
Yeah.
But they really were, they wanted to make sure that people succeeded when they finally made the decision to go. So I did. I went back to Hartford, Connecticut, which is the area we grew up in, and I got a job and worked in a small kind of a bar and grill type place for that year. And, you know, at some point in there, I got back in touch with the folks at the Culinary Institute and said, I did it, you know, and they said, okay, great, come join us. And they had they kept that spot for me as they promised.
So, quick question. I just want to back up real quick. How was that first year that you went into the culinary industry? You worked in a restaurant, right?
Yes, it was a bar and grill type of a place run by an old Italian couple. He was miserable. He was a very cranky old guy who I could do nothing right for that whole year in his eyes. Fortunately, his wife was the exact opposite of him. She was wonderful. We got along quite well. We laughed and joked quite a bit. But he was just, he had gotten quite elderly at that point and just kind of took a lot of his frustrations out on me. And, which was fine. I worked probably about 35 hours a week in the kitchen. And it was interestingly enough, this place was located in the parking lot of Pratt & Whitney Aircraft Factory in East Hartford, Connecticut. And so a lot of our customers were the guys that worked in the factory. And they would come in for, you know, cheeseburgers and chili and soups, and, you know, they'd have a couple of beers before, during, and after work sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was quite an interesting group of people that showed up in there. It was a, you know, small kitchen. We kept it really, really clean. We made a lot of things from scratch. You know, it gave me the exposure that I needed. The things that I really liked about it was actually making the food. I didn't necessarily like the way the old man kind of managed me, but that's part of the deal. And that really didn't have any influence on my decision to proceed. Although he did tell me a couple of times that he never thought that I would make it in the business. So I think that was a little bit of a motivating factor for me. He's like, well, I'm going to show this guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what year was that?
That was 1977 into 1978. So probably like from the summer of 77 into, you know, late spring of 1978.
Okay.
Before I started culinary school.
Awesome. And how old were you at that time?
I was just about 20 years old.
20?
Yeah.
Okay. So then you worked about a year in that place.
Yes.
And then you went back to the Culinary Institute of America in New York, right?
In Hyde Park, New York, right. So I left that restaurant and began my education at the Culinary Institute.
Awesome.
In June of 1978. At that time, I'm not sure if this is still how they do it, but they started new classes every 3 weeks, a new group of students every 3 weeks. And every 3 weeks a new group graduated, or a different group graduated. And everybody just kept moving up one class every 3 weeks. Every 3 weeks everything changed over. 72 people would leave, 72 more would come in, and 72 more would move up. And everybody just kind of went through the 20 different classes. And it was absolutely amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I never liked school. And when I got there, I made friends the very first day. Some of them I still am in touch with. And it was just fabulous to be in a learning environment where first of all, you're learning about something you wanted to do. And secondly, you actually got to use your hands. It was physical learning as opposed to just sitting there in a classroom, you know, trying to cram all this information in your head and remember it for a test. So it was one of the best experiences of my life going to that school.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
That's great that you found that guidance counselor helped you kind of navigate that and pushed you into going into more of a trade.
Yeah. He kind of teased out of me what I liked, what did I want to do, and you know, he knew that I had taken some cooking classes in high school and enjoyed them and got good grades in them, and you know, why don't you follow that? You know, it's not a bad idea. Short of anything else, that made sense, and so I pursued it, and I'm glad I did.
That's great to hear. So, is there any particular memory that stands out to you? As you said, it was one of the best experiences of your life.
Well, when you learn so much information that's all new to you, it really sticks in your brain. And I think the gathering of all that information was certainly one of the more memorable things, because I carried that information with me throughout the rest of my career. But as far as when I think back to my actual time being there, I would have to say that it was some of the chef instructors that I recall very fondly, and then of course the friendships that I had developed and the camaraderie with the other students. We were so close. You worked every day for almost 2 years with these same folks, and we lived in the same dorms basically, and we were together all the time. We celebrated at the end of every class, and then we all were nervous together at the start of a new class, and it was kind of like this little family unit that we had, and I remember that as being a very good time, very, very fond memories of that. Another thing that I remember really well, and that was a real special time for me, was the part of the education there at the Culinary Institute that was called at the time the Externship program, where you were required to leave the school and go out into the field and work. When you got to about the halfway point, everybody went on an externship program. Unless you had already had a lot of work experience. Obviously I didn't fit into that category, and neither did most of my friends and co-students at the time. So everybody that was in our class did go out on externship. And really they had in their placement office, books of places that were reliable restaurants or hotels all across the country that were approved by them for students to go and work. And I had always wanted to go to New Orleans. And I thought, that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to try to get an externship position in New Orleans. And so I went in and I looked, in the placement office, looked through those books, got the information, the contact people, the addresses, and I wrote 3 or 4 letters to various hotels down in New Orleans and got hired by one of them. And so did a couple of my friends, and they had wanted to go to New Orleans. So we, when the time came, 3 or 4 of us got in a couple of cars, and we drove from New York down to New Orleans, and we all rented a small house, and everybody went off into the various hotels that they got jobs at. And for the next 4 months, we lived and worked in New Orleans and shared our experiences. It was very. I remember being, when I think of the house that we lived in, being there alone most of the time, because we were all on different schedules. Everybody worked very hard, very long hours, and so we weren't home that much. But I remember when I was home, it was usually home by myself, and I didn't. Nobody wanted to spend that much time at home anyway, because you're in New Orleans. You want to do all these, all the things that New Orleans has to offer, which was checking out the restaurants and the nightlife and so on and so forth. Now, this was 1979, and I won't say that New Orleans hadn't been built up yet. There were still some pretty big hotels, but the waterfront, where the convention center is now, and some of the big hotels that are right on the Mississippi River, they weren't there. And so it was a much smaller city in terms of the buildings and the real estate and all that. So there were a lot of small mom and pop restaurants that we used to go to quite a bit, besides some of the bigger ones that were well known in the French Quarter. And this was also before the time where Cajun cooking really became a national phenomenon. And you might be familiar with the name Paul Prudhomme, who was a chef in the early 80s that kind of introduced Cajun cooking and the New Orleans style cooking to the rest of the country. He had a great personality. He was kind of this larger than life chef that ran a prominent restaurant down there in New Orleans, and then wrote a book, and I think he was the one who probably introduced to most of the rest of the country all the blackened catfish, blackened, we after that we got blackened everything, blackened chicken, blackened prime rib, everything blackened showed up on menus, and none of that had happened yet. So New Orleans was still kind of this best kept secret type of thing. Everybody knew it was a great food city, but a lot of the food hadn't moved out of New Orleans. The gumbos and the étouffées and things like that. So it took Paul Prudhomme and then later Emeril Lagasse to come and through TV shows and their public persona and their popularity to kind of move that stuff out, which is great. I worked in the Pontchartrain Hotel, which was a couple of miles removed from the French Quarter, and it was an grand old hotel with a gorgeous dining room, but really classic old-time New Orleans menu offerings that were just phenomenal. I mean, the food like that wasn't available anywhere else in the country. It was quite the experience down there. They was very welcomed in the kitchen. They did a lot of things from scratch. They had their own pastry shop, very small kitchen, and a hotline, and a small prep kitchen, and a pantry. But put out a lot of meals. It was a very high-end place, and it turned out to be a really, really good experience for me to work in a high-end, fast-paced, kind of a high-pressure situation in a city like that. It was wonderful. And again, I made a really good friend down there, and he was born and raised in New Orleans, and when we had days off together, he would take me to places that most people don't get to see when they travel in New Orleans.
Wow, very cool.
Which, ever grateful for having that experience with him.
So you really experienced like food fads coming out of there, like the blackened seasoning, things like that, because you knew of it, but then you're saying like years later it started coming out.
They moved out of the city and out into the national arena of food, if you will. So we did have some dishes like that, but New Orleans is very classic. Older New Orleans kitchens used to really pride themselves on their seasonings and on certain things. If you made a really good crawfish étouffée, for example, which is kind of a crawfish stew, if you will, people knew your restaurant because you had a good one of those, or certain toppings on fish dishes. There were certain spices that were used. Cayenne pepper was always popular, black pepper, and those are kind of the basis for the blackened seasonings as well. So I don't think we had anything that on the menu that was called blackened this or blackened that, but we did use some of those spices. But there was a lot of sauces. There were still very, at the time, rich sauces were pretty popular. So there was a lot of hollandaise. There was a lot of cream sauces. We had oysters Rockefeller, oysters Bienfil, crab meat Remick. These are all mayonnaise and heavy cream-based sauces with fresh seafood, and really, really good, but very, very, very rich. Very rich. So probably those things wouldn't get a lot of play on menus currently, but they were good.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then you did a 4-month stint in New Orleans for your externship, and then you went back to the Culinary Institute of America.
Right, back to Culinary Institute in Hyde Park for 8 more months, where we finished our program. Finished up in the Escoffier dining room, which was a nationally recognized French restaurant, which, imagine, if you will, maintaining that level of quality and turning your staff over completely every 3 weeks with brand new people. So think of the pressure on the chef who is instructing that, not only the kitchen, but the dining room, to keep that level up even on that very first day when those new students come in. So that was a lot of fun. You know, that was everyone's goal when you got into the Culinary Institute, was to get to the Escoffier room, or the E room. When you got there was always this sense of pride that you made it, but for 3 weeks it was like, we can't screw this up. And you worked half of the 3 weeks in the kitchen, the other half in the dining room, and then you graduated. So it was, those last couple of months were just really, they moved quickly, they went by fast, and you spent a lot of time thinking about what you were going to do when you graduated. Of course, the goal was to get to the E room, but of course, once you were done with the E room, it's like, now you're done with school, you had to leave, and you had to go, you had to find work if you hadn't already. So there was a lot of different things pressing on you at that time. It was a very, it was fun, stressful, a lot of good stuff.
So you get done with the last part of the CIA, the Escoffier room, and like you said, you have you have to think about what's next, what's coming after the CIA.
Right.
And you had quite the unique experience, right?
Yes.
Why don't you elaborate and tell us what such a cool story of what happened to you?
Sure. So our graduating class was scheduled to graduate in January of 1980, and that's exactly what happened. We did. Now, just before Christmas break, either late November or early December of 1979, the placement office put word out that several companies were looking for students to come and help at an event that was going to take place nearby in February of 1980. And anyone student that was interested could come down and sign up, and they will come in and either conduct interviews, or the placement office would forward resumes on to these folks who were looking for students. So the place was Lake Placid, which was about 90 minutes or 2 hours north of Hyde Park. And the event was the 1980 Winter Olympics. Several companies had rented out homes in the Lake Placid area for the duration of the Olympics so that they could entertain their clients. They were the ones that were seeking chefs to come up and prepare meals for the clients who were going to be flown in and treated to the Olympic Games. So what ended up happening was a couple of my friends went and applied, and I didn't. I'm still to this day not sure why I didn't right off the bat, but I didn't. And by the time I realized this probably is something I should do, I went down to the placement office, and all the positions had been filled. They'd already gotten more than enough applicants and so on. And 3 of my friends had gotten chosen to work at one location with another person who they didn't really know. And as it turns out, that fourth person, the one that they didn't know, had dropped out for some reason. So they came to me and said, "Get your resume in there, see what happens. Maybe you can get in with us."
Second chance.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. I brought my resume down, and one thing led to another, and yeah, all right, sure, why not? You're here in front of us. You're better than anybody else we've got right now. So they made me part of that 4-person group to go work in this house on Lake Placid. So what the deal was basically was that for the duration of the Olympics, which were 2 weeks in length, they the company flew in a dozen or so people. They arrived, they had dinner, they went out to evening events, they came back to the house, and we made them breakfast. We sent them off with a packaged lunch. They came back for dinner. They did the same thing the next day, breakfast, packaged lunch, and then they left, and a new group came in. So there was about 5 different groups that did this rotation for like 3 days each. So we were hired to do all the food, and a couple of weeks before the Olympics started, the coordinator, a man named Jake, brought us up to Lake Placid to meet with us and discuss menus and come up with menus and help source the food. One of the girls that was part of our group lived in Manhattan, she lived in New Jersey, but she knew New York City very well, where to get a lot of the best foods and so on. And this was really a money was no object type of a deal. So we had really amazing food. Anything we suggested for the menu. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's put that on the menu.
Very cool.
Yeah. So all of that fell into place, and we got up there a few days before the Olympics started, and we got all the food all set. We made our stocks for the soups and ahead of time, and some of the baking and so on, whatever prep you get done ahead of time. And ran through a practice dinner and a practice breakfast, and then the guests came in, and we had it was very easy. It was 4 of us cooking for 12 people. It was really quite fun, and it didn't really challenge us too much. And they absolutely loved it. The folks who hired us loved the job that we did. The place we stayed at was gorgeous. We got out to see the opening ceremonies, and I had the opportunity one night after dinner. The folks who were organizing it said they had 2 tickets available for the Czechoslovakia-U.S. hockey game, and this was a huge game. Czechoslovakia was the 2nd best team in the world at the time, and the United States had kind of turned heads by being undefeated up to that point. They had won their first 2 or 3 games, and now it was time to play this juggernaut from Czechoslovakia. So, we went down there thinking, it's all going to come crashing to a halt tonight, but the U.S. team just beat them from one end of the ice to the other. They just pounded on them. I think the final score was 7-3. It wasn't even that close. And everybody was just like, can these guys really do it? Can these guys really do it? And then when the play-in part of the tournament was over, and now it was time to go into the last 4 teams to play for the medals, they go into the medal round. All that was left was the United States and Finland and the Soviet Union. Well, yeah, the Soviet Union, and I think Sweden at the time. Those were the 4 teams that remained. And of course, the United States drew the Soviet Union, and that was the Miracle on Ice game, which I had an opportunity to attend that game as well.
Wow.
And it was just one of the most special events of my life. And for all the 11,000 people that were there, I'm sure they've never forgotten the feeling of being in that building that night, to witness what was probably one of the greatest athletic moments in the history of North American sports. It was just phenomenal. So that was my Olympic dream, my Olympic experience, and I'm so glad that so many things came together to make that happen for me. Had I not graduated from the Culinary Institute right at that time, I would not have gone up to that event. I wouldn't have been part of that. If I had graduated earlier, I would have already been off working somewhere. If I had graduated later, I would have been still in school. So it was perfect. It was the perfect arrangement. So there was a lot of luck involved, and I'm ever thankful that that luck smiled on me right at that time, and I had the chance to get to that game, and just one of the best memories of my life.
Yeah, quite a historical moment, and such a, all the stars aligned for you. That's really amazing.
Yeah, they sure did, and it was amazing. It was just a fantastic night, and an interesting thing about that was that game started at 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Lake Placid. So this is 1980 now, but it wasn't televised until 8 o'clock at night, and there was no, nobody had cell phones and internets, or there was none of that stuff. So most people in the country didn't know what the outcome of the game was until probably 10:30, many hours after the end of the game. So we were, having been there, we were some of the first people to know. So you literally would have to, go to a pay phone and start pumping coins into it to call your friends or family and say, I was at the game, we won, you gotta watch it.
The big old spoiler alert.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I think I did that actually with one of my best friends who's a great hockey fan. I called him up and told
Bet
him
the house on America.
Yeah.
Bet the house.
Yeah, go crazy, man. So, but yeah, that was. It's funny how they did things, back then with tape delay. There's no point in doing that now because everybody knows what's going on every second of the day, right?
Right. So that was a first incredible experience out of the Culinary Institute of America after you graduated. And you have told me numerous stories about your travels and working all over the nation. Can you, talk a little bit on that?
Sure. So, yeah, after Lake Placid, I went back home to Hartford and got a job at a really nice restaurant in downtown. Worked there for about a year and a half. And I think at about the 1 year point, I decided that I wanted to travel. I wanted to go somewhere else and do what it was that I was doing. It's one of the great things about the food business is it's very portable. You can go anywhere you want because there are food service establishments everywhere in the country, everywhere in the world. So I was the fifth of 6 kids, and all of my older siblings had traveled quite a bit. I had an older brother at that time living in Los Angeles. An older sister had actually gone out there and lived out there for a year, and they had driven across. And that really made a huge impression on me because they would send postcards back home and send stacks of pictures back home about the places they had seen on the drive across the country. And they always took pictures of welcome to Oklahoma, welcome to Texas, welcome to, the signs on the side of the road. And I thought, man, I've got to do that someday. I've got to get out there and check this out. And it didn't really matter where I went. I just wanted to go somewhere. So I had remembered that there was a job fair in the last few weeks that I was at the Culinary Institute, and I met somebody from a company called Rock Resorts at the time that had a booth at this job fair, and I spoke to them, and they were telling me about the various properties that they had. And Rock Resorts, the Rock is short for Rockefeller, and the Rockefeller family had owned a handful of very high-end, prestigious resorts in North America and in the Caribbean. So my brother, another brother of mine, had already at this point spent a couple of years working in Yellowstone National Park, and came back and said how beautiful it was. And I remember this Rock Resorts had a hotel that they operated in Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming. Boy, that sounds that sounds like as good a place as any. So I, a year and a half after that job fair, I reached out to them, and they hired me and said, come on out and work in our hotel for the summer season in May of 1981. And I got out there and had a great time. This was a giant hotel, a large tourist resort, and it wasn't uncommon for us to serve 500 dinners a night out of this huge kitchen.
And this is a summer resort.
A summer resort. And one of the neat things about it was not only did I have the opportunity to work there under the best chef I had ever worked for, the most organized, professional, classy chef that I had ever had the opportunity to work for. And I just really watched every single thing he did. Watched how he worked, how he ran the kitchen. It was a huge kitchen. I mean, he had 3 sous chefs and over 20 cooks and prep people. There was a full butcher shop downstairs and a full bake shop and a large storeroom and stewards and all kinds of resources at his disposal. And he made good use of them. And so I really, I didn't ask a lot of questions, but I just watched, thinking someday this is going to serve me well. And met a lot of good friends, had a lot of great times, got an opportunity to experience heavy volume food preparation, how to run a big operation, as opposed to, a small kitchen that, might be challenged to put out 200 dinners a night. So we could be doing 500 dinners a night in the main dining room, and a 500 person sit down banquet in another part of the building. And how do you manage those things? Well, just watch the chef. He's got it under control.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Well, you got to be organized. Of course, this wasn't his first year doing it. He had a lot of experience, but it was a wonderful opportunity. So it was only a 4-month job, learned an awful lot, and went back to Connecticut after that. And I did not go back to the place in Hartford that I originally worked at for the year and a half. I decided it was time to find something for me to do on my own, and I did. I just went around knocking on back doors, and somebody hired me. It's an Italian restaurant in Farmington, Connecticut, and they had a chef there that was kind of inexperienced, I would say. Didn't have, at that point then, didn't really have the experience that I had. And after a few months, he kind of bowed out, and the owner asked me if I wanted to be their chef, be their head chef. So, yeah. So that was my first chef's job.
Wow.
And it was...
How far out of culinary school?
Yeah, I was only about a year and a half out.
Wow.
I started in the fall of 1981. Yeah, barely 2 years out. So that was kind of surprising, but because of the experiences that I had, I'll go back to the first job I had after the Olympics was at the Brownstone Restaurant in Hartford, Connecticut, which was truly a real high-end restaurant, one of the best in Hartford at the time. Everybody on that staff, all the cooks that were in the kitchen at that time, eventually progressed to either an executive chef position somewhere or owner of their own restaurant.
Oh, wow.
That's how talented and ambitious everybody in that kitchen was. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you end up in a kitchen and folks are there just because it's a job for them. They're not really dialed into the culinary arts. It's just, this is what I've done since I got out of high school, and I'm kind of good at it, but I'd rather be working on cars or something like that. But everybody there was there because they liked to cook. They wanted to be in this business. And like I said, they all, including myself, eventually went on to become the leader of a kitchen, an executive chef, or they own their own business. They own their own restaurant. So being around people with that kind of drive was really helpful for me. And then the experience in Wyoming to watch this huge professionally run operation become part of that really gave me some experience that was every bit as valuable as the Culinary Institute experience. So you throw all that stuff together, and even though I was only 23 now at this point, that's when I became a head chef for the first time, and it was it was very interesting. It was a lot of hard work. It's different, when you're in charge.
Yeah,
it's very different.
You got to call the shots.
Yeah, you gotta manage people, and you gotta stay on top of everything that a chef has to stay on top of. But it was a good first chef's job, and I'm glad I went through that. It was kind of rocky for me, but I did that for a year or so, maybe a year and a half, and I decided I want to go back out to Wyoming again. So I did. I got back in touch with the chef out there, and this was 1983, and he wanted me to be a sous chef. So I jumped at that opportunity, to work even more closely with him. And so I did that the second year I was out there. And that summer was significant in my life because that is when I met the young lady who would become my future wife. And we've been together ever since. And she was traveling from Massachusetts with a friend. And so she had the travel bug, and I had the travel bug. So we got together, and we spent the rest of that summer together. We traveled, we ended up driving back across the country, across Canada. We went up to visit some friends in Washington State, then drove all the way back to New England across Canada. And then we spent a couple of years together. We decided to get married, but neither of us wanted to stay in New England after we got married. We wanted to go do our own thing on our own terms, and we decided that Alaska would be the place we were going to go. So that's what we did. Right after our wedding, we came back from our honeymoon, we packed up our car, and we drove to Denali Park in Alaska from Hartford, Connecticut. It was about a 2-week trip, and we had secured jobs up there by that time, and they had hired me as executive chef for one of their hotel dining rooms, and we were just hoping to get jobs. I applied for, I think, a busboy and a bar back, the lowest positions in food service, just because I wanted, and she did as well, we just wanted to get hired.
Yeah. And
when they saw my resume at that point, and it had the Culinary Institute, it had the Silo restaurant, the Brownstone in Grand Teton National Park, and some of the other jobs I had after that. And they called me up and said, why do you want to be a bar back? So we need an executive chef here. And I said, all right, I'll listen to that. So I interviewed for that, and I don't know if anyone else interviewed for it or not, but they hired me, and it was wonderful. So it was really quite the experience working up in Alaska. I think the biggest challenge was getting the food, making sure that you had the food that was on your menu that was going to be up there. There was really one food distributor in Anchorage, and we were 5 hours north of Anchorage. So you couldn't make too many mistakes in ordering, because you couldn't we got a truck once a week, basically, with supplies on it, and I had to set everything up before the season started. If I put a New York strip on the menu, the person I was buying them from said, well, how many do you think you're going to need? Because I have to bring them in from Seattle. And I don't have room in my freezer to keep a summer's worth in there for you. So you kind of got to let me know how many do you think you'll need the first couple of weeks.
Oh, man.
And so I had to sit there and think about, the rate of use for everything on the menu. Because he couldn't store everything. He didn't have enough room to store everything for the entire summer season, like I said. And so we had to have things shipped in incrementally. So it all worked out. He turned into be a great friend of mine. And he was such a valuable resource in helping me. Because I ended up working here for the next 2 summers. So I worked there in 1986, 1987, and 1988. After the 86 season, they promoted me to executive chef and food and beverage manager for the entire operation. And they had 11 food service outlets. And they had 2 hotels, then they gained another hotel. They bought another restaurant across the street. They had a pizza place, they had a deli, they had employee feeding, they had all kinds of stuff. Then, we had large groups come in. A couple of hundred people at the beginning, at the end of the seasons, which a lot of summer resorts have, on what they call the shoulder seasons, before the families start traveling. And so the experience there in creating new menus every season, well, it was everything that I ever learned at the Culinary Institute finally got use. All of as the food and beverage director now, I had to concern myself with the bar and with the dining room, with things like tablecloths and linens and silver and glass and alcohol, and making wine lists and costing out special drinks, in addition to what I had already known about, creating food menus and pricing them out and procuring all the food products. So it really was a test of using everything that I knew, and at the same time kind of learning on the job, because that was the first time I had to do that, that much work. And so it boggles my mind even now when I think back about each season, and we would open in mid to late May, but I wouldn't get started until February. They wouldn't have me on the payroll until early February. So, February, March, April, 3 months to create menus, source the food, hire staff, for 3 hotels. It was a lot of work.
Wow.
It didn't leave you much time, to daydream during the course of the day.
Yeah.
So you had to move quickly, and all the menus for the locations that were in the national park had to be approved by a representative from the Department of the Interior, which is part of their job to manage the concessionaires in the park.
Oh, okay.
And so, that was always, it was one thing to make a menu, but the menu had to be approved.
Yeah.
The pricing had to be approved. If they ever had any questions about, they wanted to make sure that you weren't gouging the tourists or using any foods from sources that they didn't approve of. And so you had to have all this backup documentation, and if they ever questioned any pricing, you have to show them, how you got to that pricing and so on.
So they're a lot tougher than the local health department.
And they also did the health inspections on the facilities that were in the park boundaries, whereas the state inspectors would do the health inspections for the ones that were outside of the national park. So there was a lot of pressure once the season opened too, to maintain. Well, there's always that pressure to maintain all the health code regulations, and always starting with new staff every year. You're lucky if anybody came back the next year. You always hope they'd come back. You would want them to come back, But it didn't always work out in everybody's life, to go up to Alaska again.
Right.
For a lot of people, that's a one-time deal. So it wasn't unusual that you'd start all over every year with hiring. It made that made it a challenge, but again, I was right there, hands-on. Even though at that point I was food and beverage director, I still took a shift in the kitchen once a week. When the chef was off, I'd give him a night off, and I'd go in and I'd either expedite or work on the line, and just kind of
keep sharp.
Yeah.
Make sure everything is going to plan.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it was very valuable experience. It was a lot of balls in the air at one time, a lot of plates spinning, and keeping track of so many things all at once. One of the good things about a seasonal resort is there's always that light at the end of the tunnel. There's always that day that the place closes that you kind of work towards as the summer progresses. And you think, well, no matter how challenging it can get, when staff starts to leave or whatever happens, there's always September 17th or September 18th or whatever closing day is. And once that happened and they closed the doors and the rooms emptied out and there were no more tourists. It's nice.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So for all the young culinarians coming into the industry now, I know it's a different time, but you have a wealth of knowledge, 35 years in the industry. And I think, a lot of your advice for me is timeless, that you've given me over my career. So what would you say to young cooks coming in the industry now? Do you have any advice, things that you think would translate from the last 35 years that you worked in the kitchen to now?
Gosh, there's probably a lot of advice I could give. Depending on whether it was for traveling or for how to just function in the kitchen. I guess I'll start with just by saying that one thing about the food service business is, and in particular in a kitchen, is that you don't really need to go to a place like the Culinary Institute to be a success in this business. You can learn on the job. You can learn from the folks in the kitchens themselves. A lot of them, some of them may be formally trained, some of them may not. Some of them that have learned just by coming up through kitchens are every bit as knowledgeable as those who have gone to culinary school. So you can, it's an industry where you can start off basically knowing nothing. You can start off as a dishwasher. Come in the back door of a place, get a job as a dishwasher, pay attention to what's going on in the kitchen. If you kind of like what you see, you start navigating over into food prep and slowly graduate your way into a little bit more responsibility with food, if that's what you want to do. And a lot of people who have worked their way up into executive chef positions have started just like that. I don't know too many other jobs where you can go from entry-level position to an executive, without 4 years of college in that same field. You can't become a bank president probably by starting off, as a teller in the bank with no financial experience. So the industry has that going for it, as I see, as a very positive thing. It's open to anybody, and anyone who is willing to do the work can move up and move up quickly. Some advice that I would give would be to spend more time watching and listening than talking. listen to the folks in the kitchen that have the experience, and kind of stay humble, even if you've gone to a culinary school and you're on your first job. There's somebody in that kitchen that knows more than you. Seek them out and watch what they're doing. So the folks that have been in the kitchen for a number of years, there's a difference between someone that's just starting out in the kitchen and someone who knows how to get their way through a busy Saturday night without breaking a sweat. When you're on that line for the first time on a Saturday night and things get pretty crazy, it can be pretty emotionally draining too. You can take a mental beating. If you haven't gone through that, you got a couple of years of experience of that under your belt. Saturday nights can be kind of hard. You can have nightmares, literally, about that. So keep your eyes and ears open. Listen, watch, learn, keep learning. You learn every day. You can learn from people that aren't doing things the right way as well. I probably learned a lot from people who didn't do things the right way, just as much as I did from people who did do things the right way. Another piece of advice I would give is to get out there and try to experience different places. In my case, I traveled all across the country. If you like to travel, by all means, this is one of the best industries you can be in, to travel and to find employment. There are so many opportunities out there: winter ski resorts, summer vacation resorts, all types of things, hotels, casinos. There's just so much opportunity in the food service business now. Even places like supermarkets, high-end supermarkets, have executive chefs, and you see the food that they put out. It's pretty amazing. This wasn't what a supermarket was like 30 years ago, but now they're making scratch-made just about everything, and it's available every day of the week, and they haven't entrusted that to just anyone. They have very knowledgeable people in the back of these kitchens that are doing all this stuff. But the traveling opens you up to a wide variety of experiences, and it allows you the opportunity to meet people from different places across the country who have different experiences with food, different experiences in their communities, different experiences with their families. Whereas if you just kind of stay in your hometown and work at the same place for 5 or 6 years, and you work the same menu, you're not really going to learn that much more. Once you learn a menu in a place and you learn how that place works, there's not much more you can learn in that place. That's all that place has to offer. I changed jobs earlier in my career fairly often. I would say probably every 12 to 18 months. And all of that helped round me into someone that could draw from these variety of experiences, as I mentioned before. So by the time I was in my 30s and 40s and was either executive chef or food and beverage director or director of dining services, which I ultimately became, and I was responsible for the entire program of food service, whether it was a 400 resident retirement community or a 5,000 student school district. I had so many different experiences to draw from at that time that I won't say it made any of the jobs easy, but it made them easier. And I was really glad to be able to draw, look back and say, oh yeah, when I was in Wyoming and we had that banquet for 500 people, I remember how we did that. Or when I created the menus in Alaska for those 11 places in 3 months, this is how I costed things out. This is how I organized my food supply. This is how I did this and that. And so only by having traveled and changed up my work history was I able to produce a resume that allowed me to get hired for bigger and better positions down through the years. So I'm not sure if the diploma from the Culinary Institute is what was eye-catching for future employers, or if it was the background. Probably a little of both. I know that the Culinary Institute was impressive for some, but I think the background was impressive for others. And so for me, they both work together, but I know for a lot of people, that I met a lot of people in the business who did not go to culinary school, and they worked at the same level, as I did as they got a little bit older, as managing as a department head in a dining program in a large operation, and being entrusted with millions of dollars, in an annual budget and dozens and dozens of employees. So, you didn't necessarily need the education; you just needed to be serious about what you were doing. As you were coming up through the ranks.
So putting your all into it, being a sponge, absorbing, learn from other people's mistakes, observe the good, all the good techniques and good leadership styles from other chefs that you work for. And would you recommend, besides working a seasonal resort, where you get a contract for 4 to 6 months, would you recommend working in a independent or smaller restaurant for a certain amount of time? You said 12 to 18 months was kind of your sweet spot where you said this was good. And was it because you worked through each of the seasons, seeing what the holidays had to offer, seeing what the slow season had to offer in these restaurants?
Yeah, I think that's a big help. I would say, stay at a place for a year, so you can do exactly what you just said, and you see those seasonal shifts, and you see the buildup. There's most restaurants, that are any good are going to have a lot of parties booked at certain times a year. And other times a year, you might go 2 or 3 months without having any parties at all. But if you're at a place around, holiday season, the workload is going to be tremendously different than it would be, say, in June, or July. And, I think definitely a freestanding restaurant is a great place to work. There's an energy in a restaurant that there isn't in a lot of other places. I've worked in freestanding restaurants. I was an executive chef in a convention center, putting out 1,000-person meals. The resort hotels, I worked in 3 different national parks. So these were resort hotels. I worked in the school district for 5 years. I worked in healthcare settings. I worked in retirement communities. I worked in a deli. I had my own little catering operation for a while. All of these things were very helpful to me, and I'm glad I did every one of them. I didn't necessarily like all of them. I think the ones I liked the most were the restaurants, though, just because I got the most satisfaction out of cooking when I was cooking in a restaurant type of a situation. So, but I didn't get the menu planning experience. I didn't get the front of the house experience. I didn't get the volume, you know, the high number, you know, 1,000-person events in a small restaurant. But you get to work a lot more closely with the food. So I had a lot of exposure to a lot of different things, which all helped me as, you know, in the last few jobs while I was working, they helped me immeasurably. So I would definitely recommend working in a freestanding restaurant, but I would also recommend, you know, going and trying something completely different. I worked in a country club. I forgot to mention that, and I also have worked in numerous employee dining facilities in factories and schools and so on. I worked for, you know, a contract server that, you know, worked for the General Electric plant, or, you know, the Colt Firearms factory, you know, all kinds of things. It's just, and you see, it's just something a little bit different in every place. And you're going to pick something up in every place, a little bit different, that will help you. And as you move forward, again, it's just really one of the best things about this business is that you can really start at the bottom and do all the things that I did, and kind of have the same career that I had. So I would say to somebody that's just starting out in the business, or anyone that's in the business and, you know, aspires to move up, there's three things that are going to catch people's attention. You know, the people who will decide if you're going to, you know, get that chef's position or management position later on. And the first thing you're going to want to do is to give a hard day's work. You know, put in a good day's work. You know, I know there's no question in my mind that the chef in Wyoming would never have asked me to be his sous chef if I hadn't worked in that kitchen harder than anybody else in that kitchen. And I did. I know I did. And that means getting my work done on time, keeping my work area clean, being there on time, all the things that make up a good employee, a good worker, not taking a lot of downtime, not goofing around, getting the work done, doing it well, keeping clean, and going the extra mile. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, there's no better words that a chef wants to hear from one of his staff is, what else can I do? What can I do next? You know, so work hard. Next thing that's going to get you recognized is creativity. And creativity comes either naturally for some people, or others, it's learned. And, you know, read, watch. There's so much content out there, you know, online now. So many chefs have YouTube stations. There's so much education, you know, on the internet. Find a cuisine, you'll find, you know, hundreds of videos to learn anything you want to learn. Be creative, try new things, try them on your friends, try them, put them on where you're working as a special or something like that. But show some creativity. So work hard, show some creativity. And then thirdly is to take leadership. You know, take leadership. Be accountable, be responsible. Those are the things that leaders do, good leaders do. And, you know, show that you can be trusted with, you know, a shift on your own. Say, hey, chef, why don't you take the night off? I got this. You know, I'll run the banquet tonight. You know, or I'll run the line while you run the banquet. You know, show a little, you know, show that you want to be responsible, that you want to be in charge. You know, how can you? And it's going to be different in every place, but so those would be the three things that I would suggest. Work hard, show some creativity, take some leadership at some point, but work hard first. You got to do them in that order. You know, no one's gonna be impressed by someone who wants to take leadership that doesn't work hard, right? So first and foremost, put in the work, then be creative. Show them you got that the culinary arts is something that you really are into, and that leadership will come from those two things.
Well, that's absolutely sound advice. Phil, thank you so much for coming on and letting me interview you. You have stories for days, and they're all fascinating. I hope that our audience here thinks the same thing. And thank you guys for tuning in. And once again, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Matt. Thank you all for watching, and so glad to be here with you today.
Awesome.